Well, just make just a couple of brief points, because go up to the floor in a moment. But I got interested in this idea of the incompatibilists, because I'm not one, actually, and I've never really understood, and perhaps we can throw this out to the floor rather than just talk about it amongst ourselves, because to me it doesn't seem incompatible, but we're determined by our biology and by our experiences, and that we're free to decide. And I've never quite understood why people see that as something that's incompatible. There's a couple of just brief points. I think that you were talking about causal power. This is a direct question, really, because I wondered whether you think that only we have it. I actually do think that we do have a causal power, as it were. And also, I mean, I'm with you on limit. I don't think limit tells us very much. I mean, we've had this discussion before, of course, but the audience haven't heard us have this discussion before about limit. Because actually the planning function, as you put it, is such a central part of what we are. The fact that things are deliberated about and pondered over the long term in order to make decisions is actually, to me, really what the exercise of free will is. Not the sort of momentary actions, but the things we plan and the things that we really think about. So whether that's, at what moment that's conscious seems irrelevant, actually. Those thoughts have still gone on somewhere. If there's a moment between when they're thought and when you're conscious of them, that seems actually irrelevant to those functions having the meaning that I think that they do. But also, just to pick up on one other point about, you mentioned group survival. Now, from a Darwinian point of view, in sort of modern understanding of Darwinian thought, actually sort of group selection is something that nearly everyone thinks doesn't take place. So the idea of an ethical function as being something that's good for group survival wouldn't make any sense in an evolutionary context.
Can I comment on rationality? And though we've kind of broadened the debate, perhaps we don't want to. If we want to go further on that, we need to decide what we mean by decision being rational. One definition used sometimes is that, in an evolutionary sense, that it's something that's good for the person doing reasoning. But we know from a lot of psychology that there's a term now, bounded rationality, isn't there? That there are boundaries around the way we reason. We can understand these in an evolutionary sense, and the deficiencies there are real deficiencies in our reasoning, and there are good aspects. There are, if you like, better than we might expect aspects of our reasoning. We can understand these in an evolutionary way, so that we are not always rational in terms of doing the best for ourselves. Sum it up like that.
Anybody else? I'll take a few questions and then we can get the speakers coming back.
I'm just going to dive in here.
Please do.
I'm really interested, intrigued by the ideas that Rita was presenting, because it makes me feel that somehow I've spent my whole life just acting out, performing, imagining that I was free. And it is almost like saying that we are in fact simply performing and acting out and not deluding ourselves, but really comforting ourselves with an idea that what we do is free. And I'm not obviously ready to be convinced on this, but one of the things that occurred to me when you were talking about I haven't read this research, I'm going to have a look at it now, Lippert, is that there are so many times in our common experience, in our sort of everyday lives, when we act when we haven't actually really thought it through, and it's almost an unconscious response, but we know actually that it's not a reflex response. Possibly it's intuitive, but it may be based on things we know, things we've learned. And at one end of the scale you have the sort of very mechanical things, like when you're driving and you're listening to the radio and doing, thinking about what you're going to make for tea tonight and doing 101 things in your head, and suddenly you have to respond to something very quickly, and you make that response. It seems to come from nowhere, and afterwards you're quite shaken because you think, where did that come from? But somehow 99 of the time people react and pull themselves out of danger. But at the other end of the scale, there is the writer or the artist who, and I think anyone who writes, not necessarily artistically, but any creative person, knows that there is that moment where you've spent weeks and weeks pondering and worrying and agitating around something, and it seems to be not only no answer there, but no point in even thinking about it anymore. And yet, 9:30 one morning, you are walking to work, and out of nowhere, the answer comes, and you weren't even thinking about it. And that hasn't just come from nowhere, of course, it's come from weeks and weeks of thought. And what I want to ask is then, you're not saying, I'm sure, I hope you're not saying, that these solutions that come, however they may come, are somehow predetermined. That there's a set of solutions out there, and that's it, they're in a box marked solutions. And somehow, that if our actions, in a sense, are predetermined, our responses are predetermined, then does that mean that there's only a certain set of parameters that we can act within?
I'll